why he used that symbol. It's the same idea. And I'm gonna give you this too before I move on. I'm gonna get into the Hebrew roots thing here in a minute. Your jaw's gonna drop off of your face when you see what I'm gonna show you. But I want you to follow me on this, and I explain it more in detail in the video. The dying God that exists in every human, that little piece of the dying God, he cannot be resurrected because he's perpetually dying. Every time a human being dies, he dies with it. But then there's more human beings, and they keep dying and keep dying. And so here's the thing. The dying God, which is the Antichrist, another Jesus, can only be resurrected if everybody stops dying. What did the serpent promise Eve in the garden? You shall not surely die, but you shall be as gods who don't die. Gods are immortal. What did Ray Kurzweil promise? Time magazine, 2045, the year that man becomes immortal. He no longer dies. We're looking at genetic ways. We're looking at technological ways, altering man's DNA somehow, some way. We're trying to teach ourselves, and I believe spirits are involved in indoctrinating and teaching the minds of these physicists and these biologists. Francis Crick admitted that he was using small amounts of LSD so that he could visualize and imagine what the double helix of DNA looked like. Where was he getting his inspiration from? The spirits. So I believe that the physicists, the biologists, the people who are working on the Large Hadron Collider, looking for the Higgs boson, I don't quite understand that, but anyway, but I do know that they have a statue of the beast sitting out in front of their building. There's a statue of Shiva with its 8 arms sitting out there, or is it 6 arms and 2? I don't know. Anyway, Shiva's the beast, the dying God who wants to be resurrected. Somehow, some way, the Higgs boson has something to do with that. These scientists are being inspired by principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, and spiritual wickedness. They have familiar spirits telling them, giving them the inspirations of what they're supposed to be doing. Why? Because the end game is to keep every human being alive on the planet long enough for the beast to be resurrected. This is what I see from the Scriptures. Is there a place in Scriptures that actually says that there will be a time when no human being will die? Go find it. Revelation 9. The 5th trumpet sounds. The scorpions come out. They sting mankind. And for 5 months, man wants to die and can't. Nobody dies for 5 months. Wow. Do you know what the gestation period of a goat is? It's the same amount as the gestation period of a sheep. And in Matthew 25, Jesus comes to do one thing: separate the sheep from the Baphomet goats. Just like the wheat and the tares. They're going to bind up the tares and separate them out from the wheat. And the tares, they get burned in the fire. Do you know how long the gestation period of goats and sheep is? 5 months. Now, take a good look at this, all right? Take a good look at that. That is the dying God in your chromosome. We just went through the Catholic thing of Lent for 46 days. Do you get it? Do you get it? Do you get the whole 46-day thing with Lent and them putting an ash X on your forehead as a mark? That's the reference to the dying God in your DNA. Now get ready for this one. A few months ago, when I first tore into the Hebrew Roots Sacred Name movement, it's because Jim Staley called here and provoked me. He called here, and I'm not returning his call. I'm not going to talk to the man. Don't have to. I'm going to warn against him. I'm going to warn against him and everybody else who's trying to drag you under the law. But he provoked me, and I went to study further what he said, if you remember that. And I mentioned here the fact that Staley and 119 Ministries and Rood and Monte Judah and all these other guys, their whole one of the foundations of their religion is that they keep saying Jesus would have spoken Hebrew, the disciples would have spoken Hebrew, they would have written it in Hebrew, they would have Hebrew this, and they would have Hebrewed that. The problem exists for them is that there is no evidence that any of it was Hebrew. And so what we have is that the entire record of the New Testament is in Greek. Well, they say that's because the Hebrew works were destroyed by the pagan Greeks who wanted to alter the doctrines. And so I brought up the question, if Jesus was all about being a Hebrew and wanted everybody to be a Hebrew, and if we're to be grafted in on the vine of the Hebrew, why then did Jesus identify himself in Revelation 1 not as the Aleph Tav, the first and last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, but as the Alpha and the Omega, the first and last letter of the Greek alphabet? Why did he do that? I am the Alpha and the Omega. You know what he was doing? He was telling the Gentiles, I'm your Savior. I said to my people I would not speak Hebrew to them anymore. With stammering lips and another tongue will I speak to this people. And God meant what he said. He wasn't going to speak Hebrew anymore. So he says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. A while later, 119 Ministries, I don't know if they heard what I said or not. I don't know. But all of a sudden now they come out with got a new revelation here. Got a new revelation from God. And it's real funny. And I wrote down what he said, so I wouldn't get it wrong, so I couldn't be accused of, well, I never said that. Well, yeah, I wrote it down. You said it. He said, the speaker of 119 Ministries said that Jesus was a Hebrew and John was a Hebrew. So what Jesus would have said, that statement just cracks me up. It makes me laugh every time. I just want to go, what he would have said. That sounds like a kid who got caught saying a cuss word, and then he's in front of his mom and dad going, I didn't, what I would have said is what it sounds like. So they're saying what Jesus would have said, had it been preserved, he would have said, I am the Aleph and the Tav. But that's not what it says in our Bible. It's not what it says in the Greek Bible. It's not what it says in the English Bible. It's not what it says. That's not even what it says in the Jehovah's Witness Bible. I am the Alpha and the Omega. That's what he said. No. He really would have said, he was saying, I am the Aleph and the Tav. And so they put out a video called The Mystery of the Aleph Tav. It's God, Jesus, Yeshua's signature, bringing you back under the Torah, telling you got to keep the Torah, got to be like the Hebrews, got to be like the Jewish rabbis. So I saw this. There's a book out there. Somebody actually in an email recommended it to me. And to the person who recommended it, I'm not trying to be mean here. There is no way in the world then I'm going to endorse that book. It's called The Hebrew Yeshua versus now the Greek Jesus. Versus the Greek Jesus. You can understand where that's going without reading it. But they promote the idea of the Aleph and the Tav that Jesus is, rather than the Alpha and the Omega. Now, here's what's significant about this. You remember when I was talking about Staley and his doctrine, and I was reading from, I still have it somewhere in here, in notes somewhere. I was reading from Staley's article that he wrote out of his own mouth about, that's not it. I've got it in here somewhere. Here he is. Staley's article, What is the Real Name of God? And in this article, he talks about how the Hebrew letters all have their own meaning. The Hebrew language is an ancient language that first started in pictograph form, meaning that originally the words were pictures that eventually evolved into letters. And so, in Hebrew thought, a name is not merely a random combination of sounds created for arbitrary designation. But the teaching is that since each individual Hebrew letter is a picture of something, that when you see a name in the Bible, in the Hebrew Bible, you don't just read the name and that's what it means. It has a secret hidden meaning based upon what the Hebrew letters look like. And I'm going to show you what I did. And it just kind of came to me. Okay? I've said, I'm going to show you now in the Bible where it's talked about that the Hebrew letters have a definition. And I went, doesn't exist. In the authoritative guidebook that God has given a record to all mankind, did you know that there's not one word in 1,189 chapters, 929 chapters of the Old Testament? There's not a word in there about Hebrew letters having a picture symbolic meaning. Not once. Even in Psalm 119, which we know was inspired by God, and each segment of Psalm 119 in verses of 8, each segment begins with the alphabetical Hebrew letter, Aleph, Beth, Daleth, Gimel, and so on, all the way down to Tav. There are 22 sections in Psalm 119. And did you know that you can read that 48 times in a row and never find out that the Hebrew letters were pictographs and they had their own secret meaning? Even in the book of Lamentations, in the original Hebrew, the book of Lamentations has 5 chapters. The first chapter has 22 verses, and the beginning of every verse in Hebrew, the beginning word of every verse in chapter 1, the first letter of the first verse starts out with Aleph. The first letter of the second verse is Beth. The third letter is Daleth, and then Gimel, and so on. And then in chapter 3 of Lamentations, you have it in segments of 3. The first 3 verses, the first letter starts out with A. The next 3 verses starts out with Beth, and then so on. So there's 66 verses in chapter 3, and then it goes back to 22 and 22 in chapters 4 and 5.